Morning, everyone. India are in a commanding place in this match on the back of KL's epic twin innings. All hail the great man. His 22 red ink will stay with us for a long time forward. Oh, and as is the law, Shubman Gill made runs in the third innings. I started to think about this. Is it a possibility that, like, when India realize they're not going to bat first, that Shubman Gill just goes and hides in a corner, knowing that he won't be able to play in the third innings in a test match? But most importantly, Rishabh Pant got some great net practice, and he proved to himself and to everyone else that he can still dance like he used to. What of Bangladesh? Their new ball bowling has continued to be outstanding throughout this match, and then they take a break. They basically take a break until India get themselves out or declare, from what we can tell so far. But their openers made some runs, which is about as common as an eclipse. And let's be honest, on this wicket, seems like a pretty decent effort so far. Then they scored at 4 runs and over with the kind of lack of certainty that would have made most people feel uncomfortable. I mean, let's not look too much into this, of course, as they're chasing over 500. But we do need to just stop for one moment and remember that Najmul Shancho is probably one of the greatest gods we've ever seen. And the last thing I was thinking about from today, and you can tell it's a moving day when you start to think about these things, is it possible that Mohammad Siraj is one of the greatest offies ever, and now we've been robbed of actually seeing him bowl? Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you need to be just as careful with your computer's defenses as well. And for that, why not use NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan and 4 additional months for free. It's also completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Sounds like rhyming slang, but it's not. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber. If you make a lot of content like me, you will need help. And that is why we use Minvo.pro, a slicing and dicing tool that uses AI to conjure up great clips from your podcast chats and meetings. If you make content, go to Minvo.pro to cut it. I'm Jared Kimber, and this is the Scoreboard. So we'll be going through the show. Please comment, like, subscribe. I mean, just like things. Like me as a person, I suppose. Maybe not as a person. Like me as a vague internet person, which is the only way to fly. But if you do put some comments in, obviously we'll try and get to them afterwards. We go through the show. It's not going to be the longest show of all time, of course, because it's a bit of a moving day. There's not as much to analyze today from an interesting perspective. But if you're desperate for something to be talked about, super chats are the way to go. We're probably only going to have one more show in this test, most likely. So, rock on. Let us get started here. India's batters control. KL, I told you guys. Look at that, 100%. Absolutely flew. No, I thought it was quite interesting that Rishabh Pant had such a great control percentage, 94.57, considering the way he plays. And he's one of those players who he does attack. He does attack in a way. I don't want to say it's a form of defense because that's a bit of a cliche, but he attacks from a position of he knows that his defense and everything else is not as solid. And so putting pressure on. So you would expect him to have a slightly lower control percentage, whereas you would expect someone like Shubman Gill to have a high one. 97.14 over the majority of that innings, though, is absolutely ridiculous. I understand the steam went out. I'm sure we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about the third innings and Shubman Gill at length over, we already have for years. But the third innings, generally, if you make runs in the third innings, within cricket, you're not as respected as you are to make runs in other positions. Because so many third innings are when the steam is out of the game a little bit. So it's very rare in the first or second innings that there's no pressure on the game. And it's very rare in the fourth innings as well for you to be in a situation where there isn't something riding on it, right? Whereas the third innings, you're either already massively behind and and you just knocking the ball around, or you're already massively in front and you're knocking the ball around. It is the most interesting innings. Anyway, Indian batters attack. You can see here, interestingly enough, Rishabh Pant went at 44%. KL again, just absolutely class there. But you could see that they were certainly the attack ratio. I would say both teams. It's been quite impressive at times in this game. And you can see here what happened with the strike rates, where Rishabh Pant knocked it around for a while, and then went crazy, and Shubman Gill did exactly. I mean, there was no surprises to me that Shubman Gill remained not out and Rishabh Pant was out, right? Because one of them thinks like a batter and the other one thinks like an attacker. And you know, I absolutely love that. I also love the uniformity of Shubman Gill. It was just like, then I'm going to go at exactly the same rate. And you can see also just the way that once Rishabh Pant got going, you know, that's a lot of attacking shots. You've got Pant and Gill spin shot by a shot. I can't say that now. Pant and Gill versus spin in tests. So you get a good idea of a player in this sort of situation. So you can see here 40% defended by Shubman Gill, 25%. And this driving percentage of 17.2, that's a really high percentage of trying to get the ball down the ground. So most players, especially against spin in this day and age, this is the sort of numbers you would expect for someone kind of, I'm trying to think of maybe a Michael Clark, Pajara, I suppose would be another one. If you're looking limited overs cricket, someone like Pollard, it's not all that common for someone to be in that way. And then you can see until we get to sort of pushing, there isn't anything else. You got sort of pushing and working. I'd be very interested to know the flick and the working, how much different those two are. But I would assume the flick is probably more done off the front foot, and working is probably when you're in the back foot and you're turning your wrists on the ball. But that is one thing within the shot data that is quite interesting. And you see this in other sports as well. You see it in basketball. Some plays are like a mixture of two different plays, right? And it's a bit the same with shots. So you do get that at time. Come over here to Shubman Gill, and you've got someone who doesn't drive all that much. And the majority of his runs come from working. And I would assume he's probably got, has he got any flicks in there? Yeah, so he probably doesn't quite flick the ball as much. But he's basically defending it or looking for one the majority of the time. And he doesn't have a very strong, attacking option when you compare that to over here where you've got the driving and you've got a bunch of different sweeps as well. So this is Shubman Gill moving the ball to the leg side, knocking the ball down to the long on, fairly standard there. And as we said before with Rishabh Pant, just a little bit more driving, looking for the runs. So he can basically, you've always got to protect these two boundaries against him, which I think makes him a big problem for everyone. And this is the highest average for wicketkeeper batters with 2,000 runs. So De Villiers is a bit of a weird one because he starts wicketkeeping in the middle of his peak. So he's already peaking with the bat and then goes to gloves. If you compare that to Sangakkara, who actually, when he was wicketkeeping, was at the start of his career and was learning his game. And you could probably, I know Walcott probably didn't make enough runs, but Walcott would be in this sort of one as well. Really, if we're comparing Pant to anyone, it should be to Flower, Gilchrist, and Ames. Those are, full-time wicket keepers. It's interesting how well Les Ames' record still holds up, by the way. Just ridiculous. I think when he played, there was one other wicketkeeper who averaged 30 in the history of the game up until the point of Les Ames, and he averaged 43.4. So just absolutely ridiculous there. At the moment, Gilchrist is the most likely one. Gilchrist is interesting because, again, he plays in his peak. So Rishabh Pant has had to play when he was younger. Gilchrist came on the bat. I think the median score for Australia when Gilchrist came out to bat was something like 250. I can promise you it's not that for Rishabh Pant. Firstly, he's up the order. But whereas Flower had the opposite problem of the Zimbabwean batters didn't actually go out that quickly, but they didn't have any runs on the board. So by the time he went out to bat at number 5, I think the median score was like, I want to say 3 for 80-ish. Maybe it was 85 or 90. I don't know if Varun can remember any of those numbers off the top of his head. But so you have a situation where Flower is you have a situation where Flower, he was just put under a lot more pressure. So if you think about Pant, he is kind of a combination of these two guys because he might end up batting at number 5 consistently, but his job is to attack, but he's also got the pressure of coming in. Now, he's not coming in after Grant Flower and Alistair Campbell, right? Like there is a bit of a difference with having Jaiswal and Rohit and Shubman Gill and these guys up the top of the order. But it's quite an interesting one. Anyway, that is 65 for 3 for Flower. Might as well have opened, Andy. I'm just saying. But yeah, so they never scored any runs. Anyway, this is Pant versus top 7 batters in the same matches he's played by country. So if we go through this, we can see in Australia, he's done very well. The only one he's really struggled in so far was New Zealand. And then we've got the West Indies down here as well. In Australia, I think we all know how good he was there. Did very well in Bangladesh and at home at the moment. So the top order is averaging 29.18 and he's averaging 65 in those matches, which is ridiculous. And this is his strike rate by bowling types. I mean, let's just start there. It'd be really interesting to see whether him or Travis Head in their peak, which one of them is actually able to score quicker off left arm finger spin. Mate, just because of the way that cricket is changing, I'm trying to think because there's no real left-handers of that similar quality from any other country that I could think of that can score a lot of runs very quickly. Anyway, we did a whole video once on Rishabh Pant versus Jack Leach. That must have been a couple of test series ago now. It's fascinating watching him go up against left arm finger spinners because they try and eventually just dump the ball into the rough outside of stump. And he's like, thanks. I don't care. I don't care if it lands in a pot of crap or if it lands on the smoothest part of the pitch. I'm probably just going to run down and try and hit it for 4 and 6. I love that he takes on fielders and everything else. But you do see here, which is quite interesting, just how dominant he is against that than everything else. And when you consider leg spin also spins into him, but he's not quite on that same level against leg spin. And the other, there's a weird one here. And the only thing I would say about this is these are all, I don't know if how accurate some of these titles are, but it is interesting that he scores quite freely against left-arm fast bowlers, but when he's faced medium pace, which there aren't a lot of left-arm medium paces, he hasn't been as quick. Whereas against right arm, he's a little bit better when it's a little bit slower. Anyway, also still scoring at a decent rate against off spin. He is a very good player. He should continue to play. We talked about this before. It's a fascinating one, isn't it? Because you can't continue your career to average 19 in the first innings. But if you are averaging 55 in the third innings, it does overcome some of that. I think, you have a look here, these combined numbers are just way too low for Shubman Gill. Whether this is just dumb luck and some of this levels off, or whether this is a sort of, Steve Smith, Everton Weeks type situation where there are particular innings he prefers to play in. I've got a memory. I don't think Sunil Gavaskar was quite at the same level, but I've got a memory that Sunil Gavaskar was another player who was very, very good later on in the match and not as good early on. I'm just trying to see if I can find those numbers. It's not quite true. But he averages 41 in the first innings, Gavaskar, and then 60, 48, 58. So there's a big jump up for the next 3 innings compared to what he did in the first innings. He's an opener. Shubman Gill is, I suppose, technically an opener, but not quite an opener. I can't tell you 100% what this is at the moment. I wouldn't be massively worried about it, though. Gill's runs per innings by age versus the average of a top 6 batter. So you can see here that Gill is the blue line and the orange line is the median runs. So when he was 21, 22, and 23, he wasn't really outperforming what we expect of it. And remember, the guys who play Test cricket at 21, 22, 23 are generally superstars, right? They are. You don't get picked at that age unless, at the very least, someone assumes you're going to be a superstar. So he was slightly under par all the way through. And we can see when he turns 24, he's gone up and he started averaging a lot more. He's only played 1 test since he's been 25. So quite interesting. And this also tells you, though, like, as I said before, this is not, look at these averages in here. They're just around 30. Young batters in Test cricket in the top 6 usually don't make any runs. I remember, is it Matt Renshaw or Zach Crawley? I did this big analysis. I think it was those guys. No, it wasn't Crawley. Oh, it was Hamid, wasn't it? Sorry. It's so hard to make runs in Test cricket at a young age. And we can see it started off really well, and we're just starting to see a little bit of an uptick here. So obviously, we'll keep watching that. It's got really interesting. What is it? 15 tests? It feels like 15 tests coming up anyway. Bangladesh's bowlers. I've talked about this before. I really do. The one thing that concerns me a little bit is sort of the lack of planning, especially to the left-handers. It's not lack of planning, sorry. It's lack of a plan. I feel like they don't quite know what they want to do to left-handers. So we said we'd follow this. Rana didn't bowl a lot of balls to left-handers, but this is all over the place. Like, what is he trying to do? So, you know, I always, when I'm commentating, I always go back to that sort of basic thing of how are they trying to get this guy out? And you look at this and you're just like, I don't know. Not ideal. Mahidi, again, much more of a grouping kind of bowler. Be interesting to have a look at Shakib's whole career, actually, to see if he's not as much of a group. So I would say that someone like Ashwin is less of a grouping bowler, and someone like Jadeja and Nathan Lyon and Mahidi are much more. You know, finger spinners are different. It also depends on how confident you are. The amount of overspin you can get on the ball plays a big part as well. You know, all these different things allow you to vary a little bit, but it does feel like this is very messy for Shakib, I would say. All right, Bumrah seam versus swing in this test. So we can see the orange is the right-handers. I'm shocked that Bangladesh have any right-handers. And the blue is the left-handers. And we could just see that against the left-handers, it's quite interesting that he's managed to get a few balls just to really, really, swing at times. And we haven't seen that so far. So that might have just been one spell. I reckon there's a sneaky orange one behind there as well. But we can see there, there is the other thing that is quite interesting is that, you know, we've got swing and seam quite interchangeable as well. And a positive value, I'll just read this out from the top, means that the ball moves in the air into a right-hander. Negative means it is moving away. So if we look at what's a good ball here. So that is a positive value on swing and a negative value on sorry, that's swinging quite a lot. That's what, 2 degrees of swing. And you can see that one hasn't seamed. And then if you go to this ball here, you've got a ball that has swung and seamed. Top of off stump seems like a good place to bowl. I think that's one of the things that modern bowlers have got very good at, is being able to hit the bails a lot. You know, keeping that length completely accurate and smashing all the way through on that one. Oh no, sorry, this is Ashwin. Sorry, I thought this was Bumrah still. My fault. This is the ball that pitched in and spun away. So the previous ball was going to go above the top of leg stump. So that one is sort of more going in on the arm, and the next one does here. This is when I use this sort of stuff a lot to kind of show to quite often when you get a ball from that angle that Ashwin has, where it's around the wicket, it's angling in and spinning away. Quite often what happens in that situation is people who haven't played a lot of cricket will look at that and they will say, oh, well, he's just played inside the line. And it's like, the reason we show this is to show he's played inside the line because the previous ball, that's where it was going. Natural variation, all those sorts of things play a big part in how that works. Anyway, let us have a quick break here on the scoreboard, and we'll be back in a moment for more of this kind of thing. Remember, chuck us a like, put it in some comments. I'll have a look at your comments right now. And if there's any super chats, I'll also get to them. Well, I'll start with them probably. I have no idea what the order is. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today. All right. Do you think the declaration was too early? If not from a run perspective, at least for resting the bowlers then? Generally, a declaration like that, I think you would talk to the bowlers. It's a 5-person attack. So, 5-person attack is you're not as worried about the bowlers, but you might have a discussion with them. I'd be shocked if they weren't involved. You've got to understand that the bowlers think about this slightly differently. You might have had a couple of bowlers who'd be like, we'd like more rest. You might have had a couple of other bowlers who'd be like, if we just go out and bowl now, we run through them today, we've got days off, right? So, look, they're 500 runs in front. I'm sure everyone had a conversation, and that's how these things go. You have a conversation as a team. You decide what is going to work for you, and then you go from there. Ari Hunt says, can Rishabh Pant be number 4 in Test cricket after Kohli, or who do you see could be that player in India? I actually think Shubman Gill is ideal number 4, but obviously I'm not sure where that's going to go. I don't know if I'd want Rishabh Pant as a number 4. I think he's so suited to number 5 and 6, the way that he plays, and there's a lot more freedom. I remember KP just fighting, not wanting to go to number 4, just because he wanted to continue to bat the way he did, and it worked a lot better if he had someone ahead of him. Just allowing him to come in when the ball was slightly older and he could attack from a better base. So I'm not a huge fan. I'm trying to think of how many attacking number 4s we've had in the history of Test cricket. Joe Root probably counts as one now, but it's not a position that you generally put someone in if you thought that they were, if you thought that there was an element of them taking the game away. So that number 3, obviously openers, we sometimes have attacking openers. Number 3, you might have someone who will change the pace of the game. Ponting not Tendulkar, Ponting and Viv Richards are 2 guys that you would probably put in that kind of situation. Then you get down to, we have a few like attacking number 5s, and at number 6, there's quite a few. But if you look at Test cricket, I wouldn't have thought there are that many players who really attack at number 4, and it's a tricky position in many different ways. I'm just having a look. I suppose Lara you would have in that range. I wouldn't say Mean Dad was attacking. I wouldn't say even Mark Wall was overly attacking. Perhaps Aravinder is another player who had a little bit of it. So it's not a position that we see that happen all that much in. And the reason is that, 2 quick wickets and you've got your attacking player out there, right? And I don't think that's the most natural place for you to be. So I don't see that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I thought Shreyas Iyer or Sarfaraz Khan kind of makes sense as a number 4. But the problem is I think both of them are number 4s more so in Asia. And I'm not saying they can't develop to be number 4s outside of Asia, but they're definitely number 4s inside of Asia at the moment, and we need to see more of them outside. Try to think if there's any other players. It's a really interesting spot for India coming forward. Let's check if anyone's put anything genius in the comments. Some player whose name I've forgotten. But yeah, I don't look at that lineup and I instantly think to myself, that they're, I shouldn't say, I don't look at India's batting talent and instantly think to myself that there's another obvious number 4. So I think someone put a comment up about, when does India drop Virat Kohli? Obviously, they're not about to drop Virat Kohli. You allow a player like that more time, just because when they come good, they could come good at a late rate that no one else can. But there must also be an element of who is the next number 4, and I'm not sure it's right there available to them. Shafiuddin says, Pant gives chances. His easy catch was missed by Shanto. All batters give chances. It's very, very rare to have a chanceless innings in Test cricket of over a score of 70. Attacking players generally hit the ball in the air more often. So you would expect them to probably go through periods where all those catches are taken and then other periods where those catches aren't taken. But yeah, all players give chances. That's a very, very normal thing. Rex says, did Rishabh Pant's past as a gymnast help him recover from his injuries to this extent? I don't. I mean, you'd have to go through his injuries and then compare it to his past as a gymnast. It's a fascinating question. When you go down on that level, I wouldn't think there's no way of being able to answer a question like that. I'm going to tell you a really interesting story that had nothing to do with cricket. But for those of you who have ever seen the movie Cool Runnings, in the movie Cool Runnings, they obviously it's a Jamaican bobsled team, and the guy who was the actual front person in the bobsled gets his head stuck out when they crash. And so if you watch the original footage, his neck is just bending. It's like it looks like he's like, I don't know anything about that sport, so I'm sure it happens more often. But to a lay person who doesn't understand it, it looked like he was going to break his neck, and he doesn't. And so I interviewed him about it. Dudley Stokes. No, is it Dudley? Yeah, Dudley Stokes. You can find him on social media. He's a lovely, lovely guy. So yeah, I interviewed him about it, and I was chatting to him about it, and he said when he played football in Jamaica, most of the players were really good with their feet, but not many were very good with their head. And so he spent a lot of time learning how to head the ball, and he reckons he got really, really strong with the neck because of that. Probably gave himself CTE, but although he seems fine, so I think we should be okay with that. And then he gets in this other position, and so perhaps a normal neck in that situation does get massively injured. But we generally, that's what we do. We look back at those moments, whether they're always true or not. We can't really tell. It's more a narrative-based thing. So, Rick, if you want to use that narrative, I think, being a gymnast is a really interesting one physically, and it might help. But also, perhaps this goes back to Dudley Stokes and to Rishabh Pant. Perhaps they were gymnasts and very good at their head because their neck was already, his neck was already strong, and Rishabh Pant already had a very flexible body in that kind of way. Do you know what I mean? Because you get drawn into the sports, looking back at it, I'm not sure I ever really liked tennis. But the reason I kept playing tennis is because I was better at tennis than other sports, right? So every couple of years, I would quit tennis again, and then I would go back and I would play, and I would beat someone really good, and I'd be like, well, I have to come and play again now, right? So there's an element of that. Like I played a lot of squash. I'm still not sure I ever liked squash, but the team I was in was really good, and we made the state finals in school and all that sort of stuff, right? I'm not sure I liked it, but I was good at it. So is it possible that these guys have the sort of physicality that you're talking about in that sort of situation naturally, and then they found sports that helped it, and then that flexibility that Rishabh Pant had might also have been played a part? I don't know. Pommel horse Pant. Why are we not calling him Pommel Horse Pant? Did he do the Pommel Horse? I'm going to have to research more of this now. Roll says, what happened to CricPicks? There haven't been any CricPicks episodes in the last few weeks. Haven't there? Are we sure? Come up all the time, don't they? Let me check my podcast, but we certainly recorded them. What's the name of my podcasts? Let's have a look. CricPicks. Yeah, you're right. The last one was on the 2nd of September. I'm not sure what's happening there. There's no reason not to. I think we recorded a whole bunch. But yeah, well, we'll make sure that there's more coming anyway. Jaron says, hi, Jared. Love your content, especially CricPicks. Can you please do a video on the best test match, ODI match ever? Yeah, well, we're sort of moving towards some of those sorts of topics. I don't know if in particular, I'm a big fan of the best, if that makes sense. There's a big topic I've been working on for a while that I haven't quite made a video of, which is realistically, it's like looking at the most pointless test innings of all time. I'm probably my stuff is drawn more towards that, Jaron, than it is the best. I mean, I think you make a fairly good claim that the best is probably the 2019 ODI is probably the 2019 World Cup final, right? Because there are bits where it was dour and everything else, but from a narrative perspective, it's incredible. And it's a World Cup final. So I don't know how you go away from that. There have obviously been great test matches as well. Although I don't have as an obvious one that comes to my mind. But yeah, we're probably less of that. We're looking at a bunch of series at the moment. I think we've already done one. We did who is the third best spinner. We're currently looking at who's the best number 5 player in test matches. We also want to do this other thing where we want to look at different players who are kind of similar in some way and do a deep dive on both of their careers, like a versus series. So it's not really trying to come out with who's better out of the two, but showing the differences between, I don't know, AB DeVries and Viv Richards. I'm not sure if we're actually doing that episode, but those are the sorts of, and we've got a whole list of those that we're looking at doing. So there is a whole bunch of sort of themed stuff that we're coming out with, but we're not really the sort that do that. But we could do a CricPicks on the best test match or best ODI ever. That feels like a horrendous CricPicks that I really don't want to be involved with, Jaron. But hey, you never know. Amit says, "How do you get Hawkeye data for every day? If it's purchased, how much does it cost?" It's on the it's on the BCCI website, isn't it? Soham says, "How are you? I know you're currently involved in a lot of projects, TalkSport, Cricket 8, etc. Can you talk a little bit about what Cricket 8 is and what your role is there?" Yeah, so TalkSport, I've been working for quite a while. When would I have started with them? 2012-ish, I think. I used to commentate the IPL for them in the old days, which was a lot of fun down in the basement at the old TalkSport offices. And then I ended up my own TalkSport show. I've actually had 2 different shows on TalkSport on the radio over the years, and am now used in this sort of role where, you know, it's either me and Bumble or me and Harmy or me and Deep, sort of do those topics, and then I'll be back commentating for them. I'm not exactly sure when, but hopefully stay tuned, and we might make an announcement because it might be quite interesting. But yeah, so I'll be commentating with them. So Cricket 8 is run by a guy called Brooke, who has worked in the sporting industry for a long time, and essentially realized that Brooke's quite a smart person, and he looked at cricket and he went, "Wait a minute. Billions and billions of dollars are bet on cricket. Let's just have a look at the Betfair market on the random ODI game today. Where are we here? Right at the moment. So England are playing Australia. I can't imagine it's a very, very sexy thing. So there's been £18 million bet on Betfair on that game. I would assume then minimum there's another 100 million or so bet on exchanges throughout Asia, and not to mention all the other people who are betting not on Betfair exchanges and everywhere else. So this is, and this isn't a lot of money for a game, right? And we've seen other games where there's been absolutely tons of money being bet and everything else. 50 million dollars on associate games, women's games, 300 to 400 million pounds bet on IPL games and big World Cup games and things like that. And so what Brooke was saying is all these people are making their bets, but there's nothing that anyone can talk about that will help anyone betting, right? So if you look at most of the articles that are written for betting are what we would call SEO articles. So they're written really, really poorly. And they don't really help anyone learn anything about the betting industry, right? And they're just there for SEO, right? So just there so that Google will pick them up. And mainstream media in cricket has always been so distant from cricket because of the match fixing, distance from betting because of the match fixing side of things. So there's always been this ickiness, despite the fact that cricket was built on betting and has always been a betting sport. And if anything, the betting in cricket seems to be going through the roof over the last couple of years. I'm talking to a lot of people in the betting industry who are saying cricket is the next big thing, and they're starting to work out because there's so much money in some of these pools, as we talked about, right? So you've got a few different elements there, and so what Brooke really wanted to do is he wanted to try and get a couple of traders on air with a couple of broadcasters to a point at which we could talk about that. And it's evolved a little bit as well. Cricket 8, like there's a lot more sort of analyst content, and partly that's because I'm on there as well. We've got the podcast, so not everyone is an expert on betting, but we have someone like Rob Barron who obviously is, and Jake, and we've had some other people come through. And the idea is that these games happen. So there was a game the other night. Afghanistan versus South Africa. Afghanistan versus South Africa. If you went to the CricInfo win predictor at halftime, South Africa were the favorites for that game, right? And maybe it wasn't halftime, but it was around halftime anyway. They were the favorites for that game. The betting markets said that South Africa were 5-1. right? So the knowledge on and South Africa obviously got nowhere near that total. I think 5-1 was good value for that, by the way. But the idea that the win predictors are saying one thing and the betting markets are saying something else. So the betting markets are a combined, almost like an AI model on their own, right? They're not always right, and everything else. So yeah, so the idea of Cricket 8 is that sort of stuff. It's only really been around the gambling side of things at the moment, and the market side of things at the moment, as I said, and doing analysis. But going forward, I would assume they would do a similar thing with fantasy cricket, because again, you can have a situation going ahead where you can have a situation going ahead where CricInfo and CricBuzz and whoever else are not really satisfying the fantasy markets either, right? So little things like that. And what Brooke has noticed, there's more money made in cricket on gambling than there is in anything else in cricket, and there is almost nothing talked about that industry. And if you watch American sports now, like, gambling is just such a part of the discussion and how these things go. And you have, so one of the big things in a lot of American sports is at the start of the year, the journalists will go through the Las Vegas lines of the team, of like, this team, it says it's going to win 101 games. That doesn't seem right. Here's why we think they're wrong, or whatever. Like, and that's why we've used them. And we started using them, of course. We started using the odds before Cricket 8, probably 6 to 12 months before. I've always looked at Odds Checker, because you listen to people talk on like podcasts or on the radio or on the TV, or you read articles, and then you're just like, is that right? And you go back and the odds are completely different. So it's like, these are the 3 favorite teams, and one of those teams is like 12 to 1, right? So you've been looking at it for a while. So yeah, that's what Cricket 8 is. I suppose the main part of Cricket 8 at the moment has just been the watch-alongs, with me, Rob, someone like Dan Norcross or Stuart Meeker or Mark Machado or Michelle, whoever it may be, sort of next to us. And me and Rob are just kind of telling you what we are seeing on the field over 3.5 hours. It's a startup company. It's it's in the middle of its seed run. I should know all this stuff, shouldn't I? I think it's in the middle of its seed funding, and it started off quite well for that. They are, it's really professionally put together and everything, and we are sort of running their content wing at the moment. So it's good fun. Kartik says, shouldn't BJP preserved only for center tests? JP? Jasprit Bumrah? JB. Do we call him JB anyway? Is he a JB? He doesn't feel like a JB, does he? Jables. Should we start calling Jasprit Bumrah Jables? No. So the issue with this is that the whole thing of preservation is, if you talk to runners and distance runners, and I think fast bowlers are really interesting physical specimens, because they are a combination between like sprinters and long distance runners, right? You need the fast twitch muscle fiber, probably of someone of a sprinter somewhere in your body, but you also need to be able to, run in for 20 overs a day. From when I've talked to some of the more sciencey fast bowling coaches, what they say is that there are certain bowlers who, they'll say this for most bowlers, they need to get into a rhythm and feel comfortable. So the idea that they can't bowl at all and just be fresh, they need to be able to work on things and feel comfortable through them. I don't think Bumrah is going to bowl in all of the test matches here, but why would you just save him for that? I mean, Bangladesh, a much bigger chance of winning this test if Bumrah doesn't play, right? If he's such a impact on the game, and you give him a couple of games, I don't think you'd ever rest someone for like months on end, unless that's what they say, right? You talk to them, you talk to their coaches, you see how they feel. There are some bowlers who might just say, I just need 2 months off. But you're always working with them. I don't like the idea of just using Jasprit Bumrah. I mean, he's a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Do we really just want to see him bowl, 4 matches a year because the schedule doesn't allow for it? And I'm not sure he would feel comfortable with that either. So, no, that's not for me. Shri says, with the talent at India's disposal, isn't it better to bet on the future than on hoping Kohli comes to good in the next test? Okay, so this is how fans think, right? So a fan will say to you, "Oh, they should just always throw kids in," right? We know that the batting averages of players between the age of 28 and 35 or 36 is way higher than it is between 21 and 27, right? Young players take time to develop and everything else. The chances are, right? At minimum, Virat Kohli is the top 30 test batter of all time, right? The chances are that India's next best player is not going to be a top 30 batter of all time. So when you are looking at just throwing a kid in, what are you doing there? And I was guilty of this when I was a fan as well, like of this whole idea of, oh, we just get someone else. And Australia cricket's always been like that, right? Like Dennis Lilly gets injured and they don't even try and rehabilitate him. They're just like, we'll just find another bowler. It's fine. You don't usually find other Dennis Lillys, right? And you end up in a situation where you continually then chase it. And what if the next two players, Sri, don't make any runs? And you've got Virat Kohli on the other side making runs everywhere. Like, it doesn't work. A player of that level is almost irreplaceable, right? You give a player that has the ability to get to that level more time than you do to other players. That doesn't mean that you don't ever drop them. It doesn't mean that you don't have a conversation with Virat and just be like, look, how much further do you think you're going to play anyway? Because we need to start making decisions about a future and everything else. We feel like we're in transition, although I'm not quite sure they're quite at transition mode in test, but they're approaching that. You have all those sorts of conversations, that's fine. But the truth is that there are 3 batters in the history of Indian cricket that are automatically on a higher level in test cricket than Virat Kohli. I think I've got that right, don't I? You would have Tendulkar obviously higher than him, Gavaskar obviously higher than him, and let's say Rahul Dravid higher than him. So you're telling me that these young Indian talent is going to be of a similar level. Then I think you're looking for so Abel says India won't find a Bumrah again, but we'll have more Kohlis. You have no idea what you will find, right? It's a really, really important thing. As someone who grew up under Glenn McGrath. Glenn McGrath is a fairly normal kind of Australian bowler. He's, quite tall. He's quite accurate. Puts the ball in the right area. It should have been quite easy for Australia to replicate Glenn McGrath. And yet, there's a whole missing generation where there wasn't another Glenn McGrath. Where there's a lot of Steve McGoffins and Ashley Nofkes, even Stuart Clarks. No one actually replicated Glenn McGrath at Glenn McGrath's level. Right. And even Josh Hazelwood, who you could say is the closest kind of version of Glenn McGrath, there's a 10-year period and he's not Glenn McGrath. Right. There's a 10-year gap and he's still not at that level of player. Right. The idea that there are thousands of Kohlis. No, there's not. I'm watching the IPL. I'm watching Ranji games. I'm watching India A. There aren't thousands of Kohlis out there. There aren't like tons of Kohlis out there, because if there were tons of Kohlis out there, he would have already been dropped, because they would have been so good, they would have forced their way in, right? They would have been next level. What you have is players like Shreyas Iyer and Sarfaraz Khan, incredible talents, right? We don't know if they can make runs overseas. Virat Kohli averages 50 in Australia and South Africa combined? Are we kidding? How many Asian players have played lots of games in those two places and made that level of runs over there? You're going to be able to replicate that? Or you've been able to replicate runs in India, perhaps even in India at the moment. Those runs aren't as important, right? This is what we are talking about. And this is this whole thing that you'll just be able to find someone else to do that job. I've seen this in sport for thousands of years, and it doesn't work, right? People, thousands of years? Dozens of years. However old I am. This idea that the next young player is going to take over usually doesn't work. They usually don't get to that same level, right? And also, it's what you are trying to replicate. Can someone tell me who is the young Indian player who can bat at number 4, who is probably going to average 50 in South Africa and Australia? No one's going to give me that player, right? They can give me good players. They can give me prospects. They can't give me a certain player, right? Because it's almost never happened in the history of Indian cricket. So you don't throw away a player like that until you are sure they are done. Now, if you look at Virat Kohli last year, he made runs in South Africa again in the first test. Did he make runs in the second test? I can't remember. He made runs in the first test, and he started to make more runs, right? Like he actually, Virat Kohli last year, what did he make last year? Oh my God, what year are we in? 2024. Yeah, let's go with 2023. He plays 8 tests. That's a lot of tests. He plays against Australia, who are the World Test champions, and he plays against the West Indies, right? Makes few runs against the West Indies, 250s and 100, and he gets a start. Against Australia, he makes 150, 240s, and 186, right? So overall, he averages 55.91. So again, are you looking at dropping a player? And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I think these sorts of things should be in constant conversation, but you have to know what you are dropping. All right. I don't massively worry about Virat Kohli's form at home, only because no one's making any runs in India outside of, a little bit of Rohit consistently, right? So we know that the pitches are very hard. So we have to accept that everyone's going to make fewer runs there. We had him playing in South Africa. Was that this year? Is that earlier this year? My God, I should know all this, shouldn't I? But we had him playing in South Africa on those, on those wickets over there this year. And he made, so in Cape Town, which was one of the most horrendous wickets I've ever seen, he made that 46. And in Centurion, he got 2 starts, one of which he turned into a 76, right? So if you look at his form over a period of, what's that now, 17, 18 months, you would suggest that there's a lot of form there. So what are you dropping, right? And I'm not like, I actually think this is a better conversation to have than the old one of like, you never drop Kohli ever. I hate the idea of you never drop great players. And it's why we have a lot of great players who drop off. But what you do allow for is for a great player to fix themselves again. Because the ability to get a player who can average 60 or 70 over 2 or 3 year span home and away is incredible. There aren't many players in the world who have ever done that. Right? You don't throw away greatness when it's shown some signs. Like if they were going to drop Kohli, the better time to drop Kohli is probably in 2022, right? Why do you start to drop? I mean, those, I don't understand that. And also, you then have to think about exactly what you were doing with that, why you were making the decisions you were making, right? If they had a player that absolutely certain was going to come in and be brilliant in Australia and at the level of Kohli and is 24, right? That is a really, really interesting decision to make at that point, right? Because then you're saying, we have this guy and he is ready. There's no one ready. Quite obviously, there's no one ready. Partly because during COVID, a lot of players like Shreyas Iyer and Sarfaraz Khan, who probably should have been playing and traveling and going to other places more, didn't get to. So there's no one obviously ready to come in and bat number 4 for India and average more than him. Someone suggested before in the comment, KL Rahul could bat at number 4 if Virat Kohli retires, right? I think that's a decent bet, right? Like there's a chance that might happen. Well, KL Rahul isn't at Kohli's level, right? Like we have to be honest. And so if you were going to get rid of him in 2022, I think you're making a sound judgment on 3 years of information at that point. We just like, look, we just don't think he's going to have another kick. But if he does have another kick, and this is the thing with a player like him, Dennis Compton is one that we were talking about the other day. If he does have another kick, he's very likely to go on a run where he averages over 50 for 2 or 3 years. Home and away in test matches. So that's a hard thing to just get rid of on the hope of potential, right? And, as a basketball fan, you go through all the top draft picks and you listen to the way that people talk about them as they come through. And then 3 years later, you have a look. A lot of the top draft picks are no longer in the NBA, right? A lot of the top draft picks didn't move over. So when they got to the NBA, they're role players. They're solid players. when you know you have someone who can star at international level, the idea of getting rid of them it's so complicated, right? And so I'm trying to think of a really good situation where a team absolutely had to move on from someone. There's just not a great one out there. But all right, well, Graham Thorpe and Kevin Peterson is maybe a really, really good one. So Graham Thorpe has that really weird career, right? Of better than his numbers look for a long period of time. Then he has a real dip. Then he comes back and he gets absolutely everything right, has a great couple of years. And on the outside of the team is Kevin Peterson, who's already shown that he can, smash international bowlers everywhere, who's literally chomping at the bit, and is a transformative player in a slightly different way. Than it's transformative in a different way, as in Graham Thorpe, brilliant player, but changed the game in 40 minutes, right? The way that Kevin Peterson can. When you have a player like that doing that, and you have another player and you're looking at it and going, okay, so skill for skill, there are some things that Graham Thorpe does better and there are some things that Kevin Peterson does better, but the actual level of those two players probably isn't that different. And we've already seen it at an international level, be successful. We can do that and we can have a look at it and we can move on. But there's every chance that Kevin Peterson came in and that they're playing across the line in test matches got completely undone, right? And then they would have been in a situation where they had lost a really, really good player. But they were probably looking at it as if Thorpe had already had his renaissance and he'd already had that upswing. And they got that sort of last dance out of him, right? If I'm India at the moment, I say this as an analyst, I'm confused by Kohli because I think he's seeing the ball quite well. And I think compared to his bad form, when I didn't think he was playing particularly well, I think he looks a lot better. But he hasn't made runs as much recently as he probably would have liked to. And now he's failed again in this test. But no, there you go. And Agro says, has India justified Pugie drop with current top order? No, I mean, not really. Only because Shubman Gill doesn't want to bat at first drop, does he? So I actually think it's funny. There's a lot of talk about this incredible talent pool of Indian batters, and there's a lot of really talented Indian batters. I do feel a lot of them kind of need to bat opening, and a lot of them need to bat at 5 and 6. And there's actually probably more of a glut of what I would call natural number 3 and number 4 type players. And so you've got Gill batting at number 3 when he wants to open. So I wouldn't say that has justified the Pujara drop. I think they wanted to play a slightly different style of cricket, and Pujara wasn't in as good form. And I think his play in India specifically was a big issue because he was so brilliant in India for such a long period of time. And he wasn't impacting always the away games outside of, the Great Australian Series. He wasn't always impacting the away games as much as they would have liked. So they've gone with another really talented player in that position, slightly out of position, which I think they will eventually move. But yeah, it's I think the most important thing is that there is really no right and wrongs with these sorts of things. You could drop Kohli tomorrow and not know that the day after he was about to go on a tear, and you can keep him in for the next 2 years, and he could look like he's coming to good and telling you that his feet are working, and the coaches are like he's ready to make runs, and he doesn't make any. Right? Like, that's how these things work, and we've got to be very, very honest about the fact that we can't be certain on any of these things. And so when you're not certain, where do you lean? If you've got a team that was potentially, let's say India weren't playing Australia and England next, and they were playing New Zealand, West Indies, and Sri Lanka, right? Away. I think you might look at that and say to Kohli, what's your end game? Are you going to play for the next 2 or 3 years? And if you are, then we're fully on board. But if you're not, we think this is a really good time to start getting these guys some experience everywhere else. Really good team management, that's what you have, is you have conversations and you're trying to work out what the future is. But yeah, I don't think you just drop great players unless you're certain. And I don't think, looking at Virat Kohli's record at the moment and the fact that he just helped them win a World Cup in T20 cricket, you could be certain that he's not about to come good again. And when he comes good, he's going to find a level that few players ever do. And that's why you don't get rid of players like that. All right, that's me done for the scoreboard today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Please like, subscribe, and do all the things that you do. And we'll probably be back for one more. And after this test match finishes, we've got plenty of other content for the rest of the site as well. So if you go over to the main site, you'll be able to find stuff, plenty of stuff happening over there. But I'm Jared Kimber. This is Scoreboard, and we'll see you again real soon. Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me. So it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket